All right, so we're going to read the through the book of Job, chapter 3. So in this chapter, I've got a little title in my Bible here that says, Job deplores his birth. And then it also says, Job curses the day of his birth. Okay, and then something to keep in mind about Job, that the book is written in poetry. And so we'll see that in the speeches. Specifically, this type of poetry in Hebrew is going to use a lot of synonymity, meaning you're going to see one thought and then a very similar thought, and then the next thought, and then a very similar thought. So similar to poetry we might be used to in our culture or current culture with rhyming. This culture would have used poetry that expressed emotion and feeling, and expressed thoughts with the kind of like metaphoric pictures that really emphasize the points, and also this way of stating one point and then stating it again. So when we read this first chapter, we'll see that happen, and then we'll also continue to look at that as it goes through. So the book of Job, the first two chapters, that would be like the prologue of the book, and then we get into this debate between Job and his friends, and Job is about to kick it off. As we see, this is a chapter he deplores his birth, and he curses the day of his birth, and knowing what he just went through in chapter 2, his skin is now covered in boils. He's in a lot of pain physically and also mentally and emotionally. Just lost his children, it seems, all 10 of them, and then he's also lost like his wealth, all his livestock. He's got servants that have passed away because of raiders and fire coming down from the sky and different things like that. So anyway, let's take a look at this. And but that being said, the middle of the book up until the last, I think around chapter 42, the book ends up ending with like an epilogue. But in the middle here, where we're starting now, this is the kind of the debate piece where we get a chapter where one speaks and then the next person speaks, and we'll kind of follow that along. So Job is first here. Verse 1, after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job spoke and said, may the day perish on which I was born, and the night in which it was said a male child is conceived. So we talked about the day perish and then the night perish. So he's two thoughts very similar. May that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor the light shine upon it. So we've got the day be darkness and the light not shining upon it. So two very similar thoughts being expressed to make the point. And then we've even more, it says, may darkness and the shadow of death claim it. May the cloud settle in it, and the blackness of the day terrify it. Verse 6, as for that night, may darkness seize it. May it not rejoice among the days of the year. May it not come into the number of the months. Oh, may that night be barren. May no joyful shout come into it. So verse 7, we've got, may that night be barren. And then a similar thought, may no joyful shout come into it, because, when someone's barren, there's no joy. When a child is about to be born, there is joy. So it's just kind of a similar way of saying things. Verse 8, may those curse it who curse the day, those who are ready to arouse Leviathan. Verse 9, may the stars of the morning be dark. May it look for light, but have none. And in verse 8, where it says those who are ready to rouse Leviathan, it can also be, a way to say somebody who's trying to control that sea creature that's very scary. So he's asking for those who may those curse it who curse the day, and those who are ready to control Leviathan. In other words, those who have some power to do something about it potentially. May all of this bad happen because he's just not happy with where his life is right now. Verse 9 again, may the stars of the morning be dark, of its morning be dark. May it look for light, but have none, and not see the dawning of the day. Verse 10, because it did not shut up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hide sorrow from my eyes. Verse 11, why did I not die at birth? Why did I not perish when I came from the womb? Again, die at birth, perish when I came from the womb. And that this poetry, that's how things are stated. We've got one thought and the very similar thought next to it. Verse 12, why did the knees receive me? Or why the breasts that I should nurse? 13, for now I would have lain still and been quiet. I would have been asleep. Then I would have been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth who built ruins for themselves. So there, verse 14, not that they built ruins, but these kings and counselors who are long gone, and the things that they did that were great are now ruins. Why is he not with them? Why is he still alive? He could be at rest. He could be among, people who have accomplished something, because his life is not doing that, and he'd rather be, put away in the same way that these great people are. Verse 15, or with princes who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. 16, or why was I not hidden like a stillborn, like infants who never saw light? So once again, stillborn infants who never saw light. Two ways of stating the same thing. So just so you can see, this is how this poetry is working. Verse 17, there the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary are at rest. Verse 18, there the prisoners rest together. They do not hear the voice of the oppressor. 19, the small and great are there, and the servant is free from his master. In other words, we've got freedom there instead of turmoil. And things that are hard. Verse 20, why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter of soul? So to me, why is there some hope here? Why is there any kind of thing good being given to the person who's in misery? Just take him out, take the light away, take the life away, because why? What's the point? Verse 21, who long for death, but it does not come, and search for it more than hidden treasures. 22, who rejoices exceedingly and are glad when they can find the grave. 23, why is light given to the man whose way is hidden, and whom God has hedged in? Verse 24, for my sighings come before I eat, and my groanings pour out like water. For the thing I greatly feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me. I was just listening to something today too, and verse 25 apparently is used a lot and as a counterpoint in what would be known as the word of faith kind of teaching. So word of faith would just say that if you have faith and you speak it into existence, it's kind of like the fake it till you make it kind of mindset, that these things will kind of materialize if you speak about them. So some people with that mindset will point to this and say, see, Job was afraid, and that's why these things came on him. However, we saw in verse 1 and 2 that this was not why these things came on him. God had mentioned that there was no reason for these things to come on him other than Satan inciting him and stating that he'll curse you to your face if these things happen. So this verse, what it really is just stating is that Job, instead of getting what he desired, he's just making the point that his life is really hard right now. The things that he would disagree with, that he did not want, has happened. The things that he feared has happened. Not because he feared them, just simply because they've happened, and they happen to be things that he did not want to happen, essentially. So that was the point being made. Verse 26, I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, for trouble comes. And that concludes chapter 3. So that's the kind of the start of the poetry, this what becomes a debate. And keep in mind, he has 3 friends waiting to answer this. I would say this would be the first part that we see Job kind of, and with his words, knock himself off kilter, because he's focusing on the problem, and he's not focusing on God. And so I think this is the first place where he just gets knocked off kilter, because just like anybody, we really want to know what's happening in our lives. There's been studies done. Our brains are pattern seeking. We want to see, if I do A, then B happens, or if I do C, then D happens. And when our thoughts about how the world works is challenged, because remember, Job kept God in the forefront, even as this terrible things are happening. He's saying, why, don't speak foolishly to his wife. Should we accept good from God and not evil also? God is our central focus. So here we see that focus shift. And I think of the story of Peter walking out on the water to Jesus. When Jesus is on the water, it says he looked around and he noticed the storm around, and the winds and the waves. And his focus essentially shifted from Christ to the problem. And then it says he began to sink, and then he called out to Christ to save him, and Christ lifts him up. So I think this for the first time he speaks to his friend, he opens the door to some sort of criticism. Now, keep in mind, his friends are sitting. They've sat for 7 days. They've definitely come for a reason. We want to hope that they're here to be encouraging to him, to help lift him out. But, human nature, our brains are pattern seeking. We tend to think if someone we care about is suffering, maybe there's something rational that they've done that they need to undo. And that's probably not the fairest assumption to start with, that someone has done something wrong in order to suffer. I think everybody suffers in some way at some point. I think the difference is the person who's focused on God, that suffering feels a lot different. As we see Job respond to these very just ridiculous amounts of pain with God, praise be the Lord, focused on God. And now he's finally starting to crack a little bit, but he still hasn't done what Satan said. He hasn't cursed God. So apparently there's a distinguishing between cursing the day of his birth and cursing God. Those are not the same things, because God doesn't charge him at any time in this book with cursing his name. And that's what Satan said he would do. And God was sure that he wasn't. So obviously God is not going to be wrong about that. So, but yeah, so, keeping in mind, we got 3 friends that are waiting to give an answer. They probably really do care about Job, and sometimes when we care about people, we may focus on what we think they've done wrong, because we want them to correct it. We want things to be right. In this case, Job hasn't done anything wrong. Satan has incited God against him for no reason. Satan has done these things without cause, and Job is suffering because of it, and trying to make sense of it, because remember, he's served God. He's done these things. He's felt the joy of provision. Satan has mentioned he's been hedged in. Job, in some way, knew this, and I think the thought of this time was that this is generally how things happen. And I think for the most part that is, but it doesn't mean it's across the board. We're all going to die at some point. We're all going to have some kind of suffering. There's going to be hard things. Once again, I think the person who's focused on God, that suffering is going to be viewed differently than someone who doesn't. I think somebody who's not focused on God, who knows that their motives are selfish, who knows that they've kept only themselves in mind, not others in mind, not God in mind, and they've made decisions for their own gain, suffering's going to feel a little bit different when things go awry than somebody who's constantly focusing on being in service to others, laying down their life for others, sacrificing their life to God, meaning giving up their way to please God. I think when suffering comes to that person, they weren't expecting anything anyway, so it's going to feel a lot different to suffer. Suffering's not going to have the sting that it does for someone who's selfish and someone who only wants to get, because that selfish person may want to serve God, but serve God for what purpose? To get something out of it. To serve other people for what purpose? To get something out of it, to get acknowledgement. Those are things to think about. I know I've been reading some different ethics philosophy, and there's this viewpoint that if you put if others become a means to an end. In other words, I'm interacting with you to get something out of it. So I'm interacting with a person to get something from them. If the person becomes the means to an end, in other words, I do something for you, not out of the joy of serving you and what you're going to get out of it, but I do it in a way to make it likely you do something for me, that I get a certain end from you, like whether a good or service or something. In essence, that's unethical. And so from a biblical pattern, that would kind of line up. We are supposed to love others and love God. So love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love others as ourself. Meaning we're not going to use somebody to get something. We're not going to interact with someone for an end, for what we're going to get out of it. We're going to interact with someone, and they are going to be the end, that the joy of serving that person, or what we're able to do for that person. And so it doesn't mean we can't make requests from people, but there's no hidden agendas, essentially. The hidden agenda piece, that would be the unethical thing. And I think God would be the same way. We're not going to interact with God for what we can get out of it. Well, I've served God, so I don't go to hell, or I serve God, so I can go to heaven. This line of reasoning would say that's not ethical. And I think the Bible would agree that if someone is to serve God the way the Bible presents him, they're serving God because he's worth being served. And that's the end of itself. God is the end, what you're seeking, not something from God. Anything that you're seeking from God would be less than God. Anything that you're seeking material would be less than God. So anything that's outside of God is less than God, essentially. And I think that pattern holds true with people. Our goal should be to connect with people. Our goal should be to serve people. And I think that's the biblical pattern. I think this is also what Job and his friends are wrestling with, is there's got to be some kind of pattern we've missed here. There's something you've done, and Job's saying, I didn't. And there's this wrestling, but Job's mind and his friends' minds have shifted from, in all circumstances, we're going to focus on God. So Paul even writes that he knows how to have a lot, and he knows how to have a little, because he can do all things through Christ who gives him strength. But his focus is Christ. So his focus is centered on God. And I think the person who has that focus and that center, they're going to be able to interact with suffering, interact with pain in a way that's going to feel a lot different than someone who's not focused, who's only focused on himself. It's very terrifying when you're only focused on your own needs and not what God wants, not what others need. And I think there's something in our design that kind of, works against us when we do that. I think God, that's my opinion, because I know with my own trials, my own tests, I can go through quite a bit if my focus is on God. I can go through very little if my focus is just on what I'm getting out of it, because life is so transitory. It's just what you can have now is just could be gone in a second. So you just don't want to put your hope in stuff. You want to always keep your hope in God. So hope you enjoyed that. The next chapter we'll read, of course, will be chapter 4. So I look forward to reading that with you. Thanks.